right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're so glad to be doing a February Sisters program here at the Watkins Museum during the year that is the 50th anniversary of that event. And we do have some February Sisters in the audience tonight. So the folks watching from home won't be able to see this, but if you could raise your hands so we could give you some applause. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us tonight for what I'm sure will be some really insightful words from our two speakers. So I would like to, what did I do with my intro? Here it is. All right. I should start out by saying that there are restrooms in the back hallway and a water fountain for anyone who might need it. Now, one of our two speakers, Kathryn Tuttle, helpfully provided some bios of our speakers, so I'll read from those. Christine Leonard Smith has been an activist since 1963 and is still active today. She has worked for voting rights, racial integration in Lawrence, an end to the Vietnam War and the several wars since, women's equality, fair labor practices, and children's rights. But always her main goal was and is peace. Through the years, Christine worked with and/or belonged to the Congress of Racial Equality, Student Peace Union, Students for a Democratic Society, Civil Rights Commission, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and the February Sisters. Currently, she works with the Lawrence Coalition for Peace and Justice. To pay the rent, Christine worked in libraries and for library automation companies as a library assistant, an automation customer liaison, and finally technical writer, which was her absolute favorite job. Now she's retired and edits the Lawrence Progressive Calendar. Our first speaker of the evening will be Kathryn Nemeth Tuttle. Dr. Kathryn Nemeth Tuttle, Associate Vice Provost Emerita, was instrumental in efforts to improve academic advising, student academic support, and student persistence at the University of Kansas. Her research focuses the history of women in higher education. More recently, she has researched the history of women in Lawrence in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Kathryn is a resident of Lawrence since 1968. She served as president of the Douglas County Historical Society Board and president of the Old West Lawrence Association. She is a co-author of the books Transforming the University of Kansas, A History 1965 to 2015, and Reflecting Back, Looking Forward, Civil Rights and Student Affairs. She was elected to the KU Women's Hall of Fame and was named a KU Woman of Distinction. Both Christine and Kathryn helped organize a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the February Sisters in spring 2022. With that, please join me in welcoming to the stand Kathryn Nemeth Tuttle.
Thank you so much, Will. Can everyone hear me okay? Let me know if there's any problems. I'll try to manage this microphone and the equipment and everything. Well, how timely is it for us to be here tonight to talk about the rights of women, the rights of all of us in this kind of environment we're in? And when we planned the original 50th anniversary celebration in February, of course, COVID came in to change us, and we did hold a panel so in April. But I can't believe how much more important it is to continue this discussion with everything that's happened in the last half year. So we're very glad to continue this celebration. In April, we had 4 panels that examined the history of the impact of this courageous action. We had an opening panel that featured Robin Morgan, who was online but alive and very much a part of that. And February Sisters, Christine Smith, Dr. Elizabeth Schultz, and they're here today. Joe Anderson, who's here today, and also Jeanette Alexander. And I know that Sally Wells is also, I want to say your name as a February Sisters. We had a fabulous politics and women panel that included Kathleen Sebelius, Barbara Ballard, Christina Haswood, Sandy Prager, and Sharice Davis via video. Kathleen Sebelius described the February Sisters as, quote, way ahead of the curve. And Sandy Prager said, these women saw things that needed to change and paved the way for greater opportunities. And then we also had a panel on the key demands of healthcare, childcare, affirmative action, and leadership And I don't know if there's enough handouts, but the original demands were on that handout. If everyone can see those, and I'd be glad to provide one of those for you directly if you give me your email address. And then finally, a panel on current student activism. So tonight I'm going to give you a brief historical overview of the event. Some of you know this by heart. Some of you are brand new to it. And but the most important thing tonight will be Christine talking from her own personal experiences, her own writing about this momentous event. So then we'll conclude on reflections of where we are now and moving forward, which I think is continues, of course, to be so important. So let's start with the issues confronting KU women in 1972. Some of you here tonight lived these. For some of you, this will be kind of surprising, I think. There was no reliable women's health care or access to birth control at Watkins Student Health Services, which was funded by student fees and still is. Doctors were moralistic and misogynistic in their attitude toward women students at that time. KU had delayed the federal Title VII, which was the employment discrimination requirements, to create a written affirmative action plan. There was an attitude of, quote, delay and indifference. See, women were only 10.8% of the faculty, and there were no female academic deans, directors, vice chancellors, or board of regents members. There were big salary discrepancies for women faculty and staff. The average salary for women faculty was $13,000 less than for men in today's dollars. And also, this is very key and I think important for Christine's work in life. The civil service and KU staff were under civil service at frozen staff wages. There was no childcare facilities on campus, and there were no women's studies department. Someone was asking me about why was the health care so limited? Dr. Raymond Schwegler, the director of Watkins Health Center, said he would not provide contraceptives to unmarried KU students under, quote, any circumstances, nor contribute to the recreational activities of the campus. This was in 1966. We talked about how Douglas County Health Department kind of stepped into the fray, especially with Dr. Dale Clinton, who was a zero population guy, for those of you who remember that time. And in 1971, the Douglas County Health Department served 8,500 birth control patients, and I bet just a few of them were from KU. To give you a perspective on the faculty changes, can talk about that. But today, women faculty comprise 40% of the faculty. They're 34% of the tenured, but only 28% of the full professors at KU. And this is very important. At that time, in 1972, 96% of the 528 classified employees were women. 96%. So they were affected by that freeze on wages more, proportionally, obviously more than men were. So those were some of the challenges. And it wasn't like the women had been doing nothing. This was an early protest in 1970 that was part of a national strike called by Betty Friedan. It was the 50th anniversary of the passing of the 19th Amendment. And they were asking for, deja vu, abortion rights, equal opportunity in the workplace, and free childcare. There was also a protest on campus for the International Women's Day in 1971. So there were many other things, but those are just a few highlights. So Robin Morgenstern, this was the impetus, this was the catalyst on February 2nd, 1972. She was a noted feminist and poet who spoke at the Minority Opinions Forum at the Kansas Union to an audience of at least 350, probably more. It was preceded by a Women's Coalition potluck, which I hope that Christine will talk about a little bit. Women shared challenges and never being taken seriously. Never being taken seriously. And I think this underscored a lot of the concern. After the talk, they held a closed-door meeting with about 250 women who attended. And this led to further discussions among 100 women staff, faculty wives, I hope Christine talks about that, graduate and undergraduate students at the Wesley building across from the Union. And the interesting thing is the Wesley building then eventually became the first Hilltop. So that was very appropriate. Well, I think I forgot to do my little clicks here, so. So this was the action on February 4th, 1972, and I hope that Christine will fill in the gaps here about how we got from Robin Morgan's talk to the takeover of the East Asian Studies building 50 years ago. 30 women, and is that the right number? I know it's gone back and forth between 30 and 35.
Well, the newspaper quoted 20, but I have 35.
Okay, well, I had 35 originally. I think that, so I had 35 and then I went back to 30, so it should be 35. And four of their children took over the East Asian Studies building at 1332 Louisiana. Now this building no longer stands. There's a scholarship hall there, but I'll show you another picture related to that. They called themselves the February Sisters. They issued their demands on flyers posted around campus and in a press release, and I've given you the demands on that written document. I think Christine will focus on this, but one thing that left me very strongly is extremely well-organized occupation, extremely well-organized. They had food, they had childcare, they had inside and outside women's groups who were managing this, walkie-talkies, phones. It was completely organized by women and very well organized by women, leaving no detail undone. Their demands: affirmative action program, designed and directed by women, a free daycare center for university staff and students, a woman to fill the vacant vice chancellor of academic affairs position, the end of unfair employment practices that foster nasty disparities in wages between women and male counterparts, an autonomous women's studies department, and a women's health program including ready access to birth control. There's a little sidebar that's interesting to me because of my background in student affairs. They were also concerned about equity in scholarships for women and admissions practices. So those were two other pieces that they felt had not been dealt with fairly. And this may not be in the quite right order, but I want to talk about this photo just 1 minute. Christine Leonard Smith with her daughter Kirsten, and this was at a press conference, and this was after the event, right after, in the Union. This is a picture of courage. This is a picture of a woman and a mother and a KU staff member. So I think all of those things coming together, the full complement of that, I think, is the only way we're going to move forward with justice and equity for women. I mean, really thinking about all those things, having more crying children in events might be a really good thing. So I really love that picture and appreciate you having us share that. So after negotiations with the Chancellor Chalmers and the Senate Executive Committee, which I think Christine can give you in a lot more entertaining detail than I can, in which most of their demands were met, especially around women's health and childcare, they left the building before 9 a.m. on the morning of February 5th. They mingled with 60 women outside to protect their identities. So that has always been one of the intriguing aspects of this, is that you did not know, the February Sisters did not know many of the women's last names, for example. We don't have a comprehensive list, right? And there was real reasons for that, because they were concerned for being expelled from the university, from losing jobs, from all kinds of repercussions. So it's completely understandable. But the rest is history. And one of the things they did was to leave an apple on each of the professors' desks. Of course, there was a lot of concern about destruction and so on. Absolutely none of that happened. And so when we promoted our panel this spring, we have a symbol of an apple with a fist. And that was excellent, I thought. And I'll just conclude with a few things from their press release. We, the February Sisters, have occupied a university building for 13 hours and negotiated directly with the Chancellor and the Senate Executive Committee. We are currently satisfied with the state of the negotiations and therefore have vacated the building. I think the university was very interested in that happening the next day, and maybe Christine will talk more about that. We, the February Sisters, are acting in good faith in the present and will work cooperatively on the plans in the process. Our actions are nonviolent, non-destructive, and carried out with the specific intention of showing our strength and solidarity and of drawing public attention to our pressing needs. And here are some of the responses to their demand. And my husband, Bill Tuttle, is a historian, and he was talking about this being probably the most successful protest at KU
I think
along
there were two that
the civil rights
were
protest.
comparable. The February Sisters in 1972 and the civil rights protest in Strong Hall in 1965.
65. So
Both
here's,
incredible.
I was there too.
of course. So here are some of the responses to the demands. On February 16th, the Chalmers appointed an affirmative action board chaired by a woman and with a February sister as a member, but they did not have their final plan for a year. In August 72, that very fall, the Hilltop Child Care Center opened, and of course it still is flourishing today. In spring 1972, we didn't get a vice chancellor, but we got Marilyn Stockstead that became the first female associate dean in the college. That fall, the women's study program and a major was established under the leadership of Professor Janet Sherestanian. And in February, Watkins staffed a women's health, that's the Watkins Health Center, staffed a women's health clinic, including birth control, but moralistic attitudes continued. Salary disparities continue. We did finally get a vice chancellor for research and graduate studies in Francis Horowitz in 1978. Danelle Talho became the vice chancellor for academic affairs in 1981. In 1992, Robin Morgan spoke at the 20th anniversary and Angela Davis at the 40th. So we've had some wonderful remembrances of this, and there's been students, groups, associations. There's a plaque, and I want to acknowledge Elizabeth Schultz tonight, who had an instrumental role in this. If you're up near 13th in Louisiana, this is right near Amini Scholarship Hall and has a wonderful summary of this important event. And I'll take a little bit from Christine's writing. We have made the unacceptability of our situation known. This is from their progress report a year later. We have identified problems and suggested directions toward solutions. The laws are, in general, on our side, and any one of us, or 2 or 5 or 50, can, if we are willing to make the effort, force the university community to treat us as human beings. And finally, this is directly from Christine. We were the February Sisters, and we prevailed. We had no idea anyone would remember us even a couple of years down the line, but for that moment, we were power personified. So Christine, I'd like you to.
That's what happens to water in Kansas.
We have another one for you here.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Christine Smith. I was Christine Leonard 50 years ago. And I took my 2 children into the house. Almost immediately after the action, I wrote a song, and I have lyrics for it. So 20 years down the road, when Robin Morgan came back to town and said, this is the first time that women all by themselves had organized such an action, I said, oh, I was there, I should write a memo, I should write about it. And so I've been working on it now for 30 years. It's called An Act Surprising. My night as a February sister. And the chapters are by the days of the week, because there were only 4, I guess, in the action. Wednesday evening. For me, it really began at dinner. That's when I first met Robin Morgan. That's when the bigger picture started to develop in my head. Women's Coalition held a potluck for Robin before her speech. I love it that when the women's movement has potluck dinners. Many that I have attended have been true agape feasts. banquets where companionship and love are more important than the menu, nurture and nutrition, a sharing and meeting of our basic needs, in short, communion. If the collective soul of the women's movement is a pasta salad, I want to be fresh basil. So we gathered to meet the speaker before the speech. We knew Robin from as the editor of Sisterhood is Powerful and the author of Monster. She has, of course, published many books since. She was billed by Minority Opinions Forum as a radical feminist. We knew her work and were eager to meet her. Perhaps we were looking for an infusion of energy. She was very congenial, quick-witted, and without pretension. We all felt immediately at home with her. I have a clear image of Robin with her severely short hair and twinkling eyes, sitting at the head of those cafeteria tables. She smiled a lot, was a joyous person, and went through the line. As we went through the line and found our places at the table, the conversation was pleasant, getting to know each other's stuff. The food delicious, the weather cold. Robin talked very little about herself. Then, when we leaned over our laden plates, Robin asked the question, "So, what's going on?" And then she listened. So we began to relate what was happening at KU. There were many, many stories told over this dinner. I don't understand, looking back, how we had time for them all. There was health care, child care, violence against women on campus. There were attempts to start a women's studies program, suggestions of women for the open vice chancellorship, and the lack of athletic funds for women. Wednesday night. This night, the Minority Opinions Forum was held in a room with a series of accordion doors that could be opened or closed to make a single room larger or smaller. The room filled rather quickly, but people were still arriving. The union staff came, opened the first set of wall doors, and began unfolding chairs. For a while, these were filled up as soon as they were placed in line. And still people arrived. It was very crowded, and the feeling of being packed in began to descend. We began to be concerned that not everyone would be able to hear. From our front row perch, several of us suggested, repeatedly and in ever louder voices, that the men move to the back and allow the women to sit up front because they needed to hear this particular speaker more than the men. The University Daily Kansan said the next day there were 400 people there, that 400 people had gathered, and about 1/3 were male. I wonder if they printed gender statistics for everybody who spoke on campus that year. The President of the United States spoke to a crowd that was about half men. The speech. Radical feminism was defined as a mathematical term, meaning root. Radical feminists believed in getting to the root of the problem of systemic sexism. Robin pointed out that power must be seized. It is never given freely. The daily violence against women was discussed, violence in Lawrence and around the world. She suggested that we learn to use weapons and carry them, that we learn karate. Anti-rape squads were suggested. These could be formed to protect women if society or the university would not. By any means was quoted widely in the press. Robin even suggested that women should research and write their own history courses and other academic classes because the current power structure was unreliable and untruthful. Just take control, she said, do it yourself. Sometimes we cheered at a comment, laughed some too, but mostly we listened, returning the favor she had given to us. We didn't want to interrupt or distract with any rowdiness. We were awed, not by Robin Morgan herself, but with the kind of love and respect that she carried for women individually and in groups. The form ended with questions, and the only question I remember was something about the average woman having the same experiences in life as, say, Jackie Kennedy. It did not seem to be an attempt to pit sexism against elitism, but rather an attempt to understand the nature of sisterhood. The answer was, of course, yes. We all women experience oppression. As the crowd was dismissed, it was announced that a reception for Robin would follow upstairs in the Union. I call it an inception, not a reception. It was nice, it had a nicely laid table. We independents thought that laying a nice reception table was exactly the sort of thing that the Dean of Women's Office felt it was important for women to know. I have vague memories of over 100 women sitting in a double or triple ragged semicircle talking. It would have been 10 p.m. or after, kind of late for a weeknight event. Why did the party turn into a meeting? It happened because we needed it. The discussion in some ways was similar to the potluck discussion, but much more. More people, more intensity, more determination. There were many more voices here and from many different areas of campus. Student women were the majority, but faculty and staff and town women were also present in numbers. Unlike the earlier discussion, this one turned to, and what do we do about it, rather quickly. It was the main topic of the night and held our attention for hours, the hours we remained there. But the hour was getting late. Before any conclusions could be reached, it was announced that the witching hour was approaching and the union would close at midnight. We needed to wrap it up. A suggestion was made that we move over to the Women's Coalition office where the potluck had been held. That building was available 24 hours a day. Those of us with other duties calling us signed a list. Call me when you need bodies for the line. But before we left the union, a small group was selected to plan an action. I believe that several committees formed at this time. Eventually, the majority went home. Robin went to the Women's Center. I don't know how long she met with the women there. In the morning, she left for the next campus. I once met a woman who was at that campus that, that Robin Morgan came to, and she talked about us. Meanwhile, which is really Thursday, all Thursday from midnight to midnight, sisters were working, thinking, planning, gathering. Hundreds of women were busy while I entered information about journals, the journal collection at the library, into the computer. Dozens of women went without sleep for 2 nights running. I was not aware of any of this. There was a group who picked the location, planned how to use it and how to secure it. Another group was studying the issues and writing the demands. Still another was working on strategy, how to inform the administration, how to get the word to the public and the press. Others were gathering food for 40 people for a week. That's a lot of food. My son, that's all he really remembers is the food. Although several years afterwards, he said to me one day, "Do you remember that night we stole that house?" And of course, typing and copying. Women seem to have done that all through the movement. Women worked all day Thursday and into the morning hours of Friday. They worked during the day Friday. I would love to know how many of us there really are. I do not know the composition of these groups. I assume the majority were students, but faculty and staff had to have been involved. And several faculty wives were involved. How many, how much, still a mystery to me. Perhaps these women too will tell their stories and the mystery will begin to be revealed. Late Friday afternoon, the university administration called a press conference and announced the creation of an affirmative action office. I was not at the press conference. I looked for the announcement in the student and city papers on Saturday and Monday morning, but the news was dimmed and shut out by the sisters taking actual affirmative action. At the time, there were people who said that the administration had hurried the creation and the announcement as a bone thrown to women to prevent them from taking the rumored action. I worked for the state of Kansas off and on for nearly 20 years and worked for other government offices. I do not currently believe that the bureaucracy is capable of hurriedly putting together an entire affirmative action plan in 2 days. They may have been capable of moving up the announcement, but even that's iffy. I do not think that the university was finally ready to announce I think the university was finally ready to announce the plan. There was a federal mandate for it after all, but I think they weren't paying enough attention to what women, particularly student women, were doing to arrange a diversion. Besides, the February Sisters action was the headline news. I merely left work a little early and began to pack clothes and toys and bedding. The children too prepared themselves without hesitation. With a quick dinner, we were off to a mysterious adventure. The children each carried a bag, mostly full of toys, and I carried one with everyone's clothes. Blankets were thrown over our arms. Friday evening. On Friday afternoon, while I was still at work, Mary called me and said that if I wanted to participate in the action, I should be ready at some hour, 5:30 maybe, to be away for up to a week. I could bring my children, or I could leave them with a designated babysitter, Joe, who's here tonight. That's how organized they were. They had a designated. And they said if we all got arrested, she would have up to 20 kids for 10 days. It was totally dark when the telephone instructions came. Be ready. Cars are on their way to pick you up. The destination was still a secret, but the disembodied voice asked how many cars we would need and were we ready. It was hardly 5 minutes from the call until the arrival of the cars. Loading would have taken only a few minutes, but would have seemed like hours. The car took us to the alley between Louisiana and Ohio streets, high on the hill, a block east of the main campus. As the cars pulled into the alley, they shut off their lights. We ran silently. Behind 1332 Louisiana, the car stopped. Instructions were to get out of the car very quietly, and someone would be waiting at the back door. No talking. Even the children seemed to understand this and followed it. There was not even nervous giggling as we took our backpacks in utter darkness, made our way to the basement door. We did not need to knock. Sisters were watching and waiting. The entry into the building provides my second most vivid memory of the February Sisters experience. There were no lights lit. We went from cold darkness to warm darkness. A sister greeted us at the door with not quite whispered words and held a flashlight towards the floor to light our way to the staircase that ran up the front of the structure. It was cave-like, womb-like. We walked up the stairs past the front double doors, which had chains wrapped around the crash bar opener. A big padlock held the chains in place. Mary felt quite empowered by the fact that women and only women had planned and carried out this action. The chains made her feel in control. Later, she volunteered for front door duty, perhaps just to stand by those thick chains and feel their power. All the images of oracular caves sacred to Demeter or Isis rushed through my consciousness and became part of my personal experience. The images of ancient women, fresh from rigorous spiritual and physical cleansing, sleeping on the stone-cold floor of Athena's cave or Persephone's temple, were clear before me in the darkness above the pool of light. And since that day, every time I read something new about caves, the womb of the goddess, I relive my entry again. It could not have taken a full minute to cross the blackness to the front of the building, but it was centuries of culture, women's culture, that we walked through. The largest and most centrally located classroom was our living room, our meeting room. This was where we came to wait until everyone who was entering the building arrived. We did not have to wait long. Some women were there before us, others followed. There were 35 women and 4 children. Accounts in the media said there were 20 in the house. There were 35. We counted. As soon as we were all inside, the basement door was chained and locked. We held a meeting. It was this meeting where we took our name, the February Sisters. In many cultures, the naming of a new child is a major rite of passage. It endows the child with characteristics they will carry throughout their lives. We all loved the name February Sisters immediately. It was empowering and elating. We said it over and over, February Sisters, February Sisters. It was decided that we would use only first names. That way we could not narc on each other, even, I suppose, under torture. This was a group decision and was strictly kept throughout the action. Even the negotiating team introduced themselves to cynics with only their first names. The last item was life in the house. We set up work schedules for childcare, food prep, cleanup and security. We set watches. There were plenty of us to do the tasks at hand, and we all had time to sit and talk as well. The schedules would be more necessary as the days wore on. That night, anyone would have done anything at any time to keep it all together. This night, most likely, no one would sleep. Outside, a sister called the chancellor's home and explained the situation, but Lawrence Chalmers didn't believe it. There may also have been either a registered letter or a telegram, but this was kind of a rumor that I haven't gotten nailed down yet. The letter informing him that the building was occupied and listing the demands. Larry was hosting an all-male bridge party that night. Press releases were also given to the University Daily Kansan, and I assume the Journal World. Flyers were passed out to students on campus. Before the meeting broke up, the siege force had arrived. Among the first to menace us in the building was a group of young men who claimed to be from buildings and grounds. They were hollering through the locked front door, and they said there were snakes in the building, and if we would let them in, they could catch it and take it away. I think this was a new slant on the panty raid. A professor from East Asian Studies showed up at the front door. He was very worried about his research and asked if he could get it from his office and take it home where it would be safe. Fortunately, he was a neighbor of Mary's, and she was able to reassure him that there was no destruction going on, no rifling of desks, no vandalism. She promised that no one would eat at his desk or touch his papers or open his drawers. Reporters pounded on the door and shouted questions. They also climbed the fire escape that ran up 4 stories on the south side of the building. They also climbed the fire escape and tried to take pictures through the windows. For a while, traffic on the fire escape became constant. The metal clanged, voices rose and fell, thumps and bangs and flashes of light. Shouts ricocheted off the windows. So many noises, so constant. It was like living next to a railroad track. Then the call came. Cynics wanted to negotiate. Friday night. Time had no meaning for me while we were in the building. There was, I'd never worn a watch. There was no clock that I remember. We entered after dark. Everything happened after dark. It was still dark when we left in the morning. The exact time in there, I have no idea. So it could have been 9:30 or midnight when we received the call that the University Faculty Senate Executive Committee was in session and wished to speak to the negotiation team. I assume that the letter we sent had some phone number or somebody's name that to get in touch with to negotiate this. We held a meeting and picked our half of the negotiators, two women. The other half would come from among the sisters that were at the Women's Coalition office, not in the building, so that the idea was that cynics would not know who was in the building and who was not. We chose 2. I believe they were both students. I remember nothing of the process of choosing or any of the special concerns were expressed. I suspect that we had so little experience about the process that we did not know what would ultimately matter, what points would be important to Synax, how much authority should the negotiating team have. We just didn't, this was just new to us. We were figuring it out as we went. So the negotiators were chosen. I am sorry that they are nameless for now. They deserve to be named and praised. I remember a face but no name. They climbed the stairs to the little window on the 4th floor and out into the cold, down the clanking fire escape. Did they walk alone the block to the coalition office, or were there sisters outside to escort them? I don't know. With the 2 women selected at coalition, the team went to Strong Hall, the administration building. The paper reported an overnight low of -1 degree Fahrenheit. We waited. Life in the building went back to normal. Reporters on the fire escape, children fussing, food, conversation, women's lives in microcosm. The woman who was always on the phone was still on the phone. The children finally fell asleep, but I don't remember any sisters sleeping. How could we? There was too much excitement in the air and too many new things going on around us. Eventually, the team returned. We had advance word of their arrival from the phone sister. The 2 building members brought back with them Elizabeth Banks. She too climbed the fire escape to the very pinnacle and came down to the main meeting room. Mary remembers a big smile on her face. She said everybody was behind us. Everybody was pleased that we were there. For this meeting, we sat not in rows facing the leader, but in concentric circles, small bunches of chairs together here and there, people sitting on the floor, still all in the main room. We were a group now, cohesive and focused. We listened with all our attention. Ms. Banks gave us a pep talk. She told us that a number of faculty and even administration supported our demands and our action. She was also there to encourage us to deal with Synax in good faith, but to stand firm. They were trustworthy in their own way, and were sincerely dedicated to getting us out by dawn. That turned out to be a very important piece of information. She left before the heavy discussion began. She did not want to influence us on these matters. Up and out and down and gone, out of the warmth into the cold. The team told them more runaround. We can't do anything in the middle of the night. We had no idea people were upset about this. We were livid. Not a single demand was satisfied. The team had no trust in Senec's motives or motivation. They wanted us out by daylight. That was it. That was the only thing the professors had made clear. But the team was satisfied and had asked to return to us and discuss matters before making any decisions. I assume a similar discussion went on in the coalition office. The sisters in the house and the sisters outside the house were not all radical feminists. Not all were convinced that the system was too rotten to bother with. For some of us, Senex would have been a plateau we hoped to reach someday. The university was not the enemy for all of us, it was the goal for some. Still, our main concern was that they were not giving any assurance that anything would actually be done. There was a still pat them on the head and smile attitude of working with women. I suggested that the team remind Senex firmly that we were not just students, but staff and faculty wives as well. Neither of these had more power or influence than the students, of course, but the image of such unity would be powerful, even though it wasn't threatening. We would be around for a long time. It was this insistence that got me onto the second negotiating team. We thought this might convince the administration that we could not be dismissed as students who would, after all, be gone in 3 or 4 years. So the sisters suggested I go along and tell them myself. The second negotiating team then was 5 instead of 4. It is said that the Kiowa people begin each prayer by holding up to the one who calls all the prayers of all the Kiowans have ever uttered in the past. This second negotiation meeting was such an invocation for me. All the meetings that had come before were held up again, meetings from years ago and from the inception. All the women who had asked for justice from the time the university was founded were with us. All the requests, the hurts, the rejections, small and large, were there. These constituted our hidden agenda. I think we were all aware of them at that time. I was probably one of the people who thought I was going to face the enemy, but I was aware that this was not the stance of the sisters. Setting through the session was a defining moment in my life. It was both enlightening and disheartening. The pinnacle of power of a major university was a bunch of boys with their own personal and collective agendas, their needy egos, and their insecurities. Their humanness showed. To this day, when I think of that meeting, I ask, is this all there is? In their defense, they had been up all night in meetings all night. Their Friday night plans had been spoiled. They were tired, probably hungry, but then we'd been up all night too. We were tired, but I wasn't foggy. We were given a speech about how upset everyone was by our action. Group W, which had just conducted some research on scholarships, was upset with our demand for equality. Dean Taylor was despairing. The East Asian director, Dr. Burton, forgotten his first name, was frantic with worry. After the snorts and retorts died down, the sisters explained that we were unconvinced that they were of their sincerity. This drew more snores. When I gave my spiel about how we weren't just students, we were staff members and faculty wives as well, a most amazing thing happened. Almost every man around that table paused for a couple of seconds. You could see them mentally asking themselves if they knew where their wives were. It was palpable, that twist of insecurity and mistrust. Unfortunately, it may have also put them on the defensive. We told them that we needed assurances. We needed to see something credible and solid. I remember a sister quoting Chalmers back to himself. He had said the university needed more clout in order to get some funding or other, and the sister explained that we were just trying to get some clout in order to get our needs met. To this day, I believe that primary motive of keeping women out of boardrooms and halls of power is to keep from exposing the fact that men are just children playing and running the world. What did I expect? Perhaps I expected a group of people able and willing to lay down all personal egos and devote their attention to solving the problems at hand. It's what I would want from a doctor performing surgery. It's what I would expect from a scientist trying to get the astronauts home. It's what I thought the political elite of a university would be like. In fact, the overwhelming disappointment of the inner workings of the seats of power is so strong that I do not remember the actual terms that we reached. My despair filled too much of my mind. If there was no reasoning with power, how could we make change without peacefully? The victory that I felt was that I had faced power and that it wasn't powerful at all. It was scrawny and vulnerable. It was subject to inner forces greater than its individual or collective intellect. To this day, I believe that the only real power is personal character and strength. I have not sought any other kind of power in my life since. I have little respect for people who have power and no respect for people who seek it. Apparently, there are things that can be done very early on a Saturday morning. Letters could be written, things could be placed on agendas, requests could be made, and funding could be shifted. As dawn approached, the amount that could be accomplished swelled. Still, they ushered us back out into the chancellery while they deliberated. I went up to Professor Burton and assured him that there was no property destroyed or stolen, no messes made. He said he was pretty sure that was the case, and he didn't seem worried to me. He looked like a man, like someone who could have slept the night away at home without a second thought. Then I went to Marilyn Stockstead, who was standing with me in, and apologized about the scholarship demand and said that we had not meant to disrupt the Group W, what Group W was working on. She said, in fact, she and Group W were glad that we had included that demand and that she was not the least bit upset about any of this. So they had all been lies. What a surprise. Did they think that we wouldn't talk to one another? That we wouldn't apologize? Saturday morning. I was ushered back into the house. We went around to the south, down the hill to the fire escape steps. We climbed up the stairs, up and up and up and in. The pre-dawn light revealed for the first time exactly how high they were. Eek. 4 stories. Chains and padlocks had been removed from all but the front door. The luggage and bedding had been packed and the food boxed to give to a local charity. An apple was placed on each office desk, an offering to the anxiety our occupation might have caused the professors and staff. As the front door was opened, the women in the yard swarmed into the building. They milled, they went upstairs and down, they picked up luggage and sleeping children, they hauled boxes of food, They just hugged everybody in sight and walked out again. There was no large crowd of observers. I think 4 or 5 people stood across the street. It was still too early for good media coverage, so the cynic smear of our faces on the front page of the New York Times was in vain. Certainly no camera was visible at our exit. No one could tell how many or who was in and who was out as we left. We locked the door behind us and marched en masse back to the very room where the potluck had been held 2 nights and 1 infinity ago. I was still upstairs when the great mill-in began, and I threaded my way down through the rooms, checking on the children and the luggage I had brought. Sisters were weaving their way up and through the building. Everyone hugged everyone they met. It should have taken hours, but in fact, 15 to 20 minutes is most likely. There was much laughing and singing. It was meant to look like confusion, and it succeeded. It was a delightful end, and it satisfied our paranoid edge. It was a great leaving. It was loud and crowded, as our entry was quiet and lonely. We went to the large upstairs room in the United Ministries building. It was noisy and happy, and a crowd filled with congratulations and pride. I don't know how many of us were there, 100 or more, a mixed crowd. Dean Taylor was there, and Professor Stockstead and the sisters. I don't think that even at this gathering, every February sister was in the room. There may have been women absent even then, women still working, women phoning, women sleeping. The February sisters may have never all been in one place at one time. We are legion. There were explanations of the deal and speeches. There were already lists of meetings some of us would have to attend. A Student Senate Executive Committee met on Sundays, for instance. We needed to talk to them about daycare. Women volunteered, someone assigned them to meetings. No doubt food was offered. This meeting was electric, with energy running very high and spirits soaring. We were the February sisters, and we prevailed. We had no idea anyone would remember us even a year or 2 down the line. But for that moment, we were power personified. I gathered up my children and my baggage and went home.
Wow.
That was great.
Christine, thank you so much. And we, I think at this point, just want to have a conversation. Obviously, many places to go from here. Today, I'm very moved by what's happening in Iran. And women there are protesting by burning their burqas and cutting their hair. And one of their phrases was, women, life, freedom, protesting the murder of Masha Amini, a 22-year-old woman who was killed by morality police for apparently not having the proper headgear. So that's a world away, but we are dealing with what's happened with a Supreme Court decision that severely inhibits women's reproductive freedoms and rights, and it's devastating, and it's devastating right now in many states. We're also having Kansas women and other voters who can't step forward to say, wait a minute, we're not going to put up with that. And it's reassuring to me that Kansas keeps getting mentioned in the national press. And people are so surprised because they think we're still such a backwater. But so there's a long way to go, isn't there, Christine? And I don't know if there's anything else. I know we do have some February sisters here, or anyone that would like to have a question or comment about where we've been and how we might move forward, I guess. Yes.
Was there any backlash, or did any of the February sisters get fired or have any?
No, there's no official backlash. There there were students that complained a lot, but
Some law students actually
Yeah.
tried to do some actions and yes, go ahead.
Lost it.
Yeah,
Sally,
I was
yeah.
on the negotiating committee also.
oh,
And Chris
excellent.
Hall, or Chris.
Yes, first
What
name's
I
only.
remember so much is, like Chalmers was there, and I don't even remember the Senate Executive Committee very much. But I do remember that I really felt like Dean Emily was so on our side.
Yeah.
And so that she really, was saying, yeah, this is good, I'll say this, and try again, and that, it was kind of up in the air, whether they were gonna follow through. And so that's the real power miracle, is that, most of these things, especially Hilltop, it happened. But they tried to kick me out of school. I was in law school, so I was like, oh God, thank heavens, do it, I'll be a And I think the guy's name was Rick Von Indy.
Yes.
Do you remember him?
Yes.
I don't know why I think it's because he knew my name, and so, and, Chris also was a law student, and they didn't try to kick her out, but it really was just, I couldn't remember how quick it happened. I mean, I knew it was quick, and that was what was so amazing, was like, from sitting on the floor, talking about stuff, to like, yeah, let's do this, I think you had the same kind of feeling. It was like,
Yeah.
whoa, yeah, I'm in, and, anybody that wasn't there, was in too. And so it was pretty, it did give me a sense of powerfulness that probably I haven't had ever since. But, when the war was over, I thought, oh, we're gonna get civilized, the Vietnam War was over. But, no, we kind of lost our way.
Keep reliving.
Yeah.
You don't learn from our history,
But
but
that wasn't something we thought to negotiate, was amnesty for all the people that were involved. But, it didn't go anywhere. They really couldn't kick me out because I just was.
I've not heard that story. I was a staff member and I had no problem with it. Everybody knew what I did. It wasn't like I was hiding it.
I can't remember what there was some kind of student charge, and I don't remember what it was. But
and I think it was orchestrated, as my memory of looking at the history of it, it was
yeah.
orchestrated by some law students who
Right,
were
who
like,
knew.
all right, we're gonna get them, but
Yeah.
it never.
Were they men?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you had a history
At
of
the time
throwing
were
students
awful.
out. I mean, with the ROTC protests of 1969, the students were thrown out, including the student body vice president. So there was a history of that, and I think the context too, in my opinion, of Chalmers and the others is it dealt with the Union burning in 1970. I mean, they were nervous. They were already on very bad relations with the whole state, with the legislature, which in my opinion, KU still suffers from today in some kind of ways. So they were nervous, and I think that it was women. I think it added that layer, and I just love the story about is my wife one of the ones that is there? But it's really hard to understand the context because it was a completely male-dominated, except for Emily Taylor, there were and the faculty members who were mentioned, Betty Banks, Elizabeth Schultz, Stockstead, and the challenges they dealt with their whole professional careers. That's all the context for this as well.
Yeah, I had the same feeling that like, really everyone was wanting to see these changes, so, that was like, because I don't really remember all the points or anything, but, they were well thought out, that we didn't go on and on and on,
Right.
that there were a few
Okay.
things.
Yes.
I know you. My name's Marcia Walsh, and Sally and I were in law school together. And to give you a glimpse of the mentality, I never forgot this. There were like, I don't know, booklets or something that the school would give out to say, this is who we are. These are the clubs we have. This is what we do. These are the courses. Okay. the Law Wives Club. This is verbatim. With my bad memory, this is still verbatim. What does the Law Wives Club do? Here the law wife gratefully listens while the professor patiently explains in simple terms exactly what her husband spends his time studying.
Yeah, that's the KU I remember. I'm glad you said that about D-Nin. We had trouble with D-Nin. CJ, who is also in the house, has a laminated letter from D-Nin to her parents saying that she was not had no business being a KU student because she let her roommate into the dorm after curfew. But I understand that that Dina was in the, she was an administrator in a patriarchal system, and her feminism was hard to find sometimes. But I had a lot of respect for her, just not at the time.
Well, yeah, because she was in a difficult, but what I remember more was that she'd say, oh yeah, we can do that. That they were looking to her because, she knew about women and stuff, and, and that she was very, well, we can try to work on that. And so, all the guys and Chalmers actually seemed to be kind of, sleepy. Do you remember that? He just was kind of, oh, okay. I don't think he was used to actually having to talk to regular people.
And Emily Taylor was definitely part of the administration. I mean, at the same time, she was an early feminist, I think, in many ways, and I think had to kind of work her way through all these images and roles of deans of women, which was controlling women's behavior, right? The hours, the curfews, and all of that. And in a very slow way, we systematically, for example, got rid of hours. But when I came to KU in 1968, I still had hours. And I was letting girls into my room window too, because we were on the first floor and everybody was down at the beer stoop and they had to get a way back. So they always had to do it through our room. But, some of the rules were definitely insane. But I do think that she intimidated some of the male administrators too.
Yeah, I think it could have been worse with a different
I
woman.
mean, I interviewed her and she said, I said, well, who did you report to? She said, I always reported to the chancellor, directly to the chancellor. I mean, she would not put up with stuff. And I think maybe some of that intimidation helped a little bit move them toward accepting some of these improvements that need to happen.
Good evening. My name is Judith Gales. I'm a retired teacher, and occasionally I am a judge at National History Day and State History Day. And to your comment, Christine, that there was a moment in your life when you weren't sure you would be remembered 2 or 3 years later, I will tell you the February Sisters are topics for young women for History Day, and I have seen more than one presentation on the February Sisters. So another generation knows them.
That's great.
Is there a plan for a documentary?
I think that sounds like a great plan. Who would like to do that?
I want to plan to get my book published.
Yeah. I think you're right. You can tell
I
from
think
her
the
writing.
film should come later.
I think, maybe a movie. I mean, it's very dramatic. I can just see the scene of it going in the night and everything.
Did you have any sense of how similarly situated large public universities at the time were, their policies towards women and women's students? I mean, did KU rank, were they kind of like most of them? Were they better? Were they worse? Did you have any sense of that?
Well, I think they pretty much rank like most of them. I don't know about not being able to get birth control. That seems like it might be uniquely Kansas, but.
And that's like, just
No,
like,
I think it's a good question.
Did the
but
Big
yeah.
Ten schools, let's say Michigan, Wisconsin?
Well, I can speak directly to that about Michigan. I was at Michigan starting in 1973, so a year later. And I remember when I went to the February Sisters things in April, I was a little shocked to hear about the hours business that was still happening then. Because at Michigan, I lived in a co-ed dorm. The people next door to me were guys. we didn't have any rules about when we were supposed to be there or anything like that. And there was a women's studies program, and there was birth control in the student health service, and yeah.
Apparently we were lower down.
But we actually had, by then KU didn't have hours, of course, either, so that ended in 1969. So my understanding is that,
Somebody at April, in the April session was talking about that there were different hours for women and men. And
Yeah,
There
men
were.
didn't have hours.
men didn't have hours, but that did officially end in 1969.
And my feeling is, they said that they were locking women up before the library closed for their own protection, but I felt like that if they locked up freshman men at dark.
And I think our health director was much further behind the times, and so the birth control issue, I think probably we were behind. Emily Taylor asserted that she started the first senior woman key program in the country. I don't know if that's true, which was 1960.
I remember.
Yeah, but most universities in the 60s still had hours, even the best ones, even the Big Tens and so on. And it was only gradually that they, decided it was
They
safe
had
to
a
let
big
them
all
out.
student women's, and then they were gonna vote out hours. That was the big thing. I'm thinking and some other things. But they wouldn't let married women come.
Yeah.
So I went through that with D&M too.
To be a student, you couldn't go to college if you were married?
No,
Oh,
you
yeah.
couldn't go to the all women students meeting.
They had a tricky method of making women enforce their own rules. So it's technically the rules and the hours at KU were decided by the Associated Women Students, and they would vote. But they were so inculcated with the standards of the day that it was hard to change. In the Spencer Research Library, they have files and files and files of parents writing in and protesting at each stage. Like the senior key is going to lead to destruction. If you give sophomores no hours, then all hell will break loose. I mean, parents, there's a lot of response to parents who were, much more conservative even, and Kansas was probably, that was part of the problem too. But
This was a time of tremendous change for women. So 1972 was also the year that Title IX was enacted.
Title IX, right?
That's-
The 50th
that's when the
anniversary. Yeah.
Marching band had women for the first time.
Yeah.
It was 72.
And a couple
And
years
it was
later.
also, it was also the year that the draft ended for Vietnam.
Yes.
That's right.
The 60s ended in 1972. When I came out in 1973, it was like, woo-hoo, party time. We're not gonna get drafted and die. And are we talking about the building that was University Relations right next to the old?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah, that's where the women's
That's
center
what,
was.
that's where the women's center was, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the East Asian language is one
Not a movie.
One street
one down.
Okay.
And the plaque is right at the spot that
Okay.
Elizabeth helped create, is right there. So you should take a look at it. I mean, not tomorrow when all the football people are there, because it'll be too crowded, but it's,
I don't know who chose that building, the strategy.
somebody had a key,
But
right?
that was really a great thing, once everyone knew where that we had an East Asia. And where it was like just a very, just worked pretty well. It was amazing.
Well, we told people that we were looking at it for daycare because East Asian was going to move into Wesco Hall when it got finished. But it would have been a terrible, terrible building for a daycare center. I can't imagine going down 4 stairs of that, carrying, screaming, scared babies. It would have been awful. Well, I thank you so much
One
for
last
what
question,
you
Nate.
Well, yeah, so I might not know this answer, but I'm quite curious, because what you were talking about with the journalists just going up and down the fire escape like rabid dogs, basically. I was just wondering, were most of the journalists trying to cover this men? I would assume probably so, but.
Well, we closed the blinds, so we stopped, so we don't really know who was out there making noise. But yeah, the people who were gonna save us from the snakes were on.
That is so symbolic and Freudian, and I don't even,
That's,
And Christine, that's you in the photograph holding your hand up.
Yes,
that's,
I
Lock
was
the
trying
camera.
to take the
Yeah.
camera away from the UDK reporter because we were still afraid that stuff might come down.
Yeah.
But I didn't get the camera and I didn't get to destroy the film, so that's why the picture is still there.
So wasn't this just after Kent State when they killed the students?
Well,
It's
Kid
2
State
years
was,
before.
yeah, it was
2 years.
2 years.
that was 70,
Before.
That was April 1970.
1970, and this was 2 years later. But I do think
Weren't
that-
you guys terrified that they'd come in with guns and shoot you?
There is a rumor, which I was never able to trace, to get hold of, that Vern Miller,
Attorney General of
remember him,
Kansas.
was the Attorney General for the state of Kansas, and he was gonna come down and arrest us all. And someone told him that there were pregnant women in the house, and he said, "No, I'm not having any part of that." I don't know whether it's true, but it's a good story.
And wasn't there some discussion about turning water off to the building and power
Yes.
off to the building? I mean,
Yeah,
they
that
were
was-
having a plan for the next step.
Yes. Well, that's why we had all this pile of walkie-talkies, was in case they cut the phones off. We knew that was possible.
Well, before we end, I just want to have us one more time give a round of applause to the. So